We already divided everything, my sister announced, her voice dripping with a smug finality that felt like a slap. You weren't invited for a reason. The lawyer, a man I didn't recognize, shifted uncomfortably in his chair behind the large mahogany desk that had belonged to our father. My sister, Lisa, stood beside him, her hand resting possessively on a stack of documents. Her husband, Mark, stood slightly behind her, a ghost of a smirk playing on his lips. I stood in the doorway of the office, the heavy oak door still slightly ajar behind me, feeling the cold draft from the hallway on my back. I had arrived for what I thought was the reading of our mother's will, a somber family duty. Instead, I had walked into the final act of a play I hadn't known was being performed. The air in the room was thick with their triumph. Lisa, 5 years my junior, had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. I was the quiet one, the responsible one, the one who blended into the background. It was a role I had accepted long ago. I had managed our parents' finances in their later years, paid their bills, arranged for their care, all while Lisa and Mark were busy living a life funded by generosity they mistook for an infinite resource. Now, with our mother gone only 3 weeks, they stood before me like conquering heroes who had just divided the spoils of a war I never even knew I was fighting. The initial shock was a physical blow, a punch to the gut that stole my breath. Humiliation followed, hot and sharp, crawling up my neck. I looked from Lisa's defiant face to Mark's barely concealed glee, and then to the new lawyer, whose eyes refused to meet mine. The family lawyer we had used for decades, Mr. Abernathy, was nowhere to be seen. "What are you talking about, Lisa?" I managed, my voice sounding distant and thin to my own ears. "Mom's will." Mr. Abernathy was supposed to. "Mr. Abernathy has retired." Lisa cut in sharply, gesturing to the new man. "This is Mr. Gable. He's been very efficient. We didn't want to drag this out. Mom would have wanted it settled quickly." She said it as if she were doing me a favor, sparing me the emotional turmoil of probate. The condescension was suffocating. "And what exactly has been settled?" I asked, my hands clenching in a fist at my sides. Mark finally spoke, his voice oozing a false sympathy that was more insulting than Lisa's open hostility. "Look, Clara," he said, stepping forward. "We know money has always been a bit tight for you. We handle the estate. The house is sold. The accounts have been closed and consolidated. We've set aside a small sum for you. A token. To help you out, a token. They had taken my family home, my parents' legacy, a lifetime of memories, and were offering me a token. The word hung in the air, grotesque and obscene. Lisa picked up an envelope from the desk and held it out to me. "Here, it's $10,000. That should be more than enough to cover any outstanding whatever." "It's more than fair." I didn't take the envelope. I stared at it, a plain white business envelope that represented the sum total of my perceived worth to them. $10,000. For a lifetime of devotion. For being the one who held my mother's hand as she passed. For being the one who answered the phone at 3 in the morning when our father had his first heart attack. For the years of quiet sacrifice they had never even bothered to notice. A cold clarity began to pierce through the fog of my grief and shock. It started as a tiny, hard knot in my stomach and spread through my veins like ice. This wasn't just about money. It was about respect. It was about love. It was about their profound, staggering belief that I was a non-entity in my own family, a footnote to be dismissed with a pittance. "You sold the house?" I asked, my voice now devoid of its earlier tremor. It was flat, cold. "We had a cash buyer, a developer. They moved fast," Mark said proudly, as if he had just closed the deal of the century. "We got a great price for it." I looked at Lisa. Her smug expression was beginning to falter, replaced by a flicker of irritation. My lack of a dramatic, tearful outburst was clearly not part of her script. She wanted me to break down, to cry, to beg. She wanted to see me wounded. "I see," I said softly. I turned without another word and walked out of the office, leaving the envelope on the desk, untouched. I heard Lisa call my name, a note of confused anger in her voice, but I didn't stop. I walked down the marbled hallway, past the portraits of stern-faced partners, and out into the bright, indifferent afternoon sun. The drive home was a blur. I don't remember the traffic or the route I took. My mind was a maelstrom of memories. I saw my father teaching me to ride a bike in the driveway of that house. I saw my mother planting roses in the garden, her hands covered in dirt. I saw holiday dinners, birthday parties, arguments, and reconciliations, all within those walls. The walls they had sold for cash. Then, other memories surfaced. Lisa calling me in a panic because she couldn't make her car payment. Mark casually asking for a loan of a few $1,000s for a can't-miss investment opportunity that, of course, missed. The endless cycle of their manufactured crises and my quiet solutions. I had always helped, because that's what family did, because I love them, and because I realized with a sudden, brutal honesty I thought my kindness would one day be recognized. I had been a fool. My kindness hadn't been seen as kindness. It had been seen as a utility, a resource, a weakness. They hadn't just mistaken my kindness for weakness. They had built their entire worldview around it. Clara will handle it. Clara will pay for it. Clara won't mind. By the time I pulled into the driveway of my own modest, comfortable home, the sadness had fully receded, burned away by a cold, resolute anger. The grief for my mother was still there, a heavy ache in my chest, but it was now entwined with a new, powerful emotion, determination. They thought I was poor. They thought I was a pushover. They had built their entire plan on a foundation of lies and assumptions about who I was. They had no idea. They had no idea that my tight financial situation was a carefully constructed facade. I lived simply because I had no taste for the ostentatious. My career as a forensic accountant for a major firm wasn't something I broadcasted. My six-figure salary, my stock portfolio, my own real estate investments, I kept these things to myself. Wealth, to me, was security, not a spectacle. They saw my 10-year-old Honda and my small house and drew the conclusions they wanted to draw. They never asked. They just assumed, and they had assumed wrong. I walked into my home office, the afternoon sun slanting through the blinds. I sat down at my desk, the same one where I'd spent countless hours managing my parents' affairs, and I powered on my computer. The turning point wasn't a dramatic scream into a pillow. It was the quiet, deliberate click of a mouse. I opened a file on my desktop labeled Parents, Estate. Inside were dozens of subfolders, meticulously organized. Scanned documents, spreadsheets, bank statements, legal agreements. A complete financial history of the last 15 years. For years, I had been the silent benefactor. When my father's business failed a decade ago, they were on the verge of bankruptcy. I didn't just help out, I bought their debt. I set up a shell corporation and purchased their outstanding loans from the bank for pennies on the dollar. Then, I had my lawyer draft a new loan agreement between my corporation and my father with lenient terms he could afford. He thought a mysterious investor had saved him. He never knew it was me. The payments he made every month for the last 10 years, they went directly to an account I controlled. The investments Mark was so proud they had cashed out, those weren't my mother's. They were high-yield bonds I had purchased and placed in a joint brokerage account with my mother, with me listed as the primary owner. The account was structured so she could draw the interest as income, giving her a comfortable retirement. But the principal, the core asset, was legally mine. Cashing it out wasn't liquidating an inheritance. It was theft. And then there was the house, the crown jewel of their heist. My heart ached when I thought of it. About 15 years ago, when my parents were struggling, I had bought the house from them outright. It was the only way to save it from foreclosure. We told no one. To the world, and to Lisa, it was still their house. We had a lawyer, the real family lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, draw up a lifetime estate agreement. They were granted the right to live in the house for the rest of their lives, rent-free. They were responsible for taxes and upkeep, which I often subsidized. The deed, however, was transferred to a trust for which I was the sole trustee and, upon the death of the last surviving parent, the sole beneficiary. They hadn't sold my parents' house to a developer. They had fraudulently attempted to sell my house. I leaned back in my chair, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face for the first time that day. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a predator that has just watched its prey walk willingly into a perfectly laid trap. You weren't invited for a reason, Lisa had said. She was right, but not for the reason she thought. They hadn't invited me because my presence, my questions, my mere existence would have exposed their flimsy, arrogant scheme from the start. They needed me to be the weak, ignorant victim they imagined me to be. The strategic plan began to form in my mind, not as a messy revenge plot, but as a series of calm, logical, and devastating steps. A legal and financial checkmate. First, I let them have a moment. I knew Lisa and Mark. Their first move would be to spend. To show off, I gave them 3 weeks of radio silence. As I predicted, their social media lit up. A brand new luxury SUV for Mark. A European sports car for Lisa. Photos of them at Michelin star restaurants, clinking champagne glasses, with captions like living our best life and honoring Mom's memory by enjoying the legacy she left us. They posted pictures of designer bags, expensive watches, and a down payment receipt for a sprawling new condo in the trendiest part of the city. Every post was a nail in their own coffin, a public declaration of their fraud. While they were celebrating, I was working. I spent the first week gathering every piece of paper. I met with Mr. Abernathy, who came out of his recent retirement with a grimly furious energy when I told him what had happened. He had been stonewalled by Lisa, and the new lawyer, Gable, told that the family wanted to go in a new direction. He helped me prepare the affidavit confirming the lifetime estate and the trust. Next, I met with my own lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Davies who specialized in financial fraud. We sat in her sterile, glass-walled conference room as I laid out the documents one by one. The deed to the house, registered in the name of my trust. The loan agreements between my corporation and my father, showing a remaining balance of over $200,000. The brokerage account statements, clearly showing me as the primary owner and them withdrawing the entire principal balance, a sum of nearly $500,000. Ms. Davies's expression went from professional interest to something approaching predatory delight. They literally stole your house and $500,000, she said, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on the brokerage statement, and then posted evidence of their spending spree all over the internet. This isn't just a civil case, Clara. This is grand larceny. This is wire fraud. This is a gift. We spent the next 2 weeks drafting the lawsuit. It was a masterpiece of legal devastation. We weren't just suing for the return of my assets. We were suing for damages. We were filing liens against everything they had just purchased. We contacted the developer who had bought the house and provided him with the true deed and title history, explaining he was the victim of a fraudulent conveyance. His own lawyers, needless to say, were very interested. We filed a formal complaint against Mr. Gable with the State Bar for his gross negligence and likely complicity. The most beautiful part of the plan, the part that felt like true poetic justice, was the timing. I chose a Friday. I wanted them to have the entire weekend to stew in the wreckage of their lives. At 9 a.m. on that Friday, Ms. Davies initiated the wire fraud complaint with the U.S. Attorney's Office. At 10 a.m., our firm filed the civil suit and the associated liens. At 10:30 a.m., the bank where they had consolidated the funds received a court order to freeze the account pending the fraud investigation. At 11 a.m., a process server, a large and imposing man I had specifically requested, arrived at their rented apartment. I imagined the scene with cold satisfaction. Lisa, probably still in her silk pajamas, sipping a mimosa, opening the door to be handed a stack of papers thick enough to stop a door. At 11:05 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Ms. Davies. It contained only 2 words. It's done. I didn't feel a rush of victory. I felt a profound sense of peace, a quiet rightness. The scales were being balanced. The unraveling was faster and more spectacular than I could have ever hoped. The first call came at 11:15 a.m., and it was a frantic, shrieking Lisa. I let go to voicemail. Clara, what the hell is this? Some guy just showed up here with all these papers. It says you're suing us. It says the house wasn't Mom's. You need to call me back right now and fix this. Mark is calling our lawyer. The second call came an hour later, from Mark. His voice was strained, the artificial confidence gone. Clara, there's been a huge misunderstanding. Our lawyer, Gable, he says the account is frozen. We can't access any of the money. The down payment for the condo is supposed to clear today. Just call us back. We can sort this out. I didn't call back. I spent the afternoon in my garden, planting new hydrangeas. The voicemails kept coming, each one more desperate than the last. Lisa, crying, accusing me of being jealous and vindictive. Mark, trying to sound reasonable, then angry, then pleading. They sent a barrage of texts. The credit card for the car payment was just declined. Clara, the dealer is calling. They're talking about repossession. What did you do? This is your fault. You've ruined everything. My favorite message came on Saturday morning. It was a text from Lisa. They took the car. They just came and towed it right out of the parking lot. Everyone was watching. How could you do this to me? I read the text, took a sip of my coffee, and blocked their numbers. For the rest of the weekend, I was unreachable. I let the consequences of their actions be their only companion. I knew the developers' lawyers would be in touch with them. I knew the bank would be sending them notices. I knew the dealership that had sold them 2 luxury cars on the basis of a fraudulent down payment would be pursuing them aggressively. They had built a glittering castle on a foundation of sand, and I had just kicked it over. By Monday morning, they were broken. I received an email from a public address. The subject line, simply please, it was from Lisa. She said they were desperate, that they had no money, that the landlord of their rental was threatening eviction because they couldn't make rent. She said Mr. Gable wasn't returning their calls. She begged me to meet. She said they would do anything. I agreed, but not on their terms. I had Ms. Davies arrange the meeting for the following day at her office. The confrontation was everything I had imagined. They arrived looking haggard and defeated. Lisa's eyes were red and swollen, her expensive clothes looking rumpled and out of place. Mark's face was pale, his usual smirk replaced by a look of grim resignation. They sat opposite me at the long conference table, with Ms. Davies at its head. They looked small and lost. Clara, I'm so sorry, Lisa began, her voice cracking. We made a mistake. A terrible, terrible mistake. We were just overwhelmed with grief. Ms. Davies cut her off before she could build any momentum. Let's dispense with the theatrics, shall we? She said, her voice like chipping ice. This wasn't a mistake. This was a calculated act of theft based on the assumption that my client was ignorant and powerless. An assumption that has proven to be, in a word, catastrophic for you. She then proceeded to walk them through their new reality in excruciating detail. She explained that the house was, and always had been, my property. The sale was void. The developer was now contemplating his own lawsuit against them for fraud. She explained that the $500,000 brokerage account was also mine, and that their withdrawal constituted grand larceny. She informed them that a federal investigation was now active. She detailed the loan my corporation had made to my father, and how the inheritance they thought they had was, in fact, collateral against that outstanding debt of over $200,000. By liquidating assets that weren't theirs, they had defaulted on a loan they didn't even know existed. Their faces went from pale to ashen. Mark looked like he was going to be sick. Lisa just stared, her mouth slightly open in disbelief. So what does this mean? Mark finally whispered. It means, Ms. Davies said, that you have nothing. The cars are gone. The down payment for the condo is being returned to my client as a partial recovery of the stolen funds. The bank account will remain frozen until the U.S. Attorney's Office concludes its investigation, and you're liable for the full amount of the stolen principal, plus damages, plus my client's legal fees. Not to mention the outstanding loan to my client's corporation. A long silence filled the room. The only sound was the quiet hum of the building's air conditioning. Lisa finally turned to me, her eyes pleading. Clara, please. We're family. You can't do this to us. We'll have nothing. We'll be on the street. That's when I spoke for the first time. I leaned forward slightly, my hands clasped calmly on the table. You will not be on the street, I said, my voice even and low. You will get jobs. You will rent a small apartment you can actually afford. You will learn to live within your means. You will, in short, live the life you always assumed I was living The life you looked down on with such pity and contempt. I paused, letting the words sink in. You told me you divided everything. And you did. You took what you believed was valuable, the money, the house, the material things. And you left me with what you believed was worthless, the truth, the legal documents, the quiet knowledge of how things actually worked. It seems you chose poorly. I stood up. Ms. Davies has my instructions. I am willing to drop the criminal charges on one condition. You sign a full confession and a repayment agreement for every single dollar you stole. It will be garnished from your wages for the rest of your lives. If you refuse, the federal case proceeds. The choice is yours. I looked at Lisa, at her shattered expression. I felt nothing. No piche, no anger, no satisfaction. Just a vast, empty peace. I thought back to her words in the lawyer's office, the words that had started it all. Oh, and Lisa, I added, my hand on the doorknob. There was a reason you weren't invited to the real planning of our parents' estate. It's because you were never a part of it. You were a liability, not a beneficiary. Actions have consequences. In the aftermath, they signed everything. Their new life was a stark contrast to their old one. Mark, who had bragged about his management job, was now working at a big box hardware store. Lisa, who had spent her days shopping and at the spa, got a job as a cashier at a grocery store. They lost their expensive friends. They moved into a cramped, one-bedroom apartment across town. I heard through the grapevine that they were miserable, constantly fighting, blaming each other for their downfall. I never saw them again. I sold the house. The memories were too painful, tainted by their greed. With the money from the sale and the funds I recovered from them, I established a charitable foundation in my parents' names, providing scholarships for underprivileged students wanting to study finance and accounting. It felt like the right way to honor them, to turn their legacy into something that created opportunity, not entitlement. Sometimes I sit in my quiet office, looking out at my garden, and I think about it all. The hurt is gone. The anger is gone. What remains is a quiet strength I never knew I possessed. They thought my kindness was a weakness, but they were wrong. My kindness was a choice. And when they forced me to, I made a different one. The greatest irony is that in their attempt to take everything from me, they gave me the one thing I truly needed, my freedom. Freedom from their expectations, their drama, and their endless, grasping need. And that is a form of wealth they will never understand.